নমস্কাৰ আজি বিশ্ব শ্ৰৱণ দিৱস প্ৰতি বছৰে মাৰ্চৰ ৩ তাৰিখে বিশ্ব শ্ৰৱণ দিৱস উদযাপন কৰা হয় বিশ্ব শ্ৰৱণ দিৱস উদযাপন কৰাৰ মূল উদ্দেশ্য হৈছে শ্ৰৱণ শক্তিহীনতাৰ প্ৰতিৰোধ কৰা আৰু সজাগতা সৃষ্টি কৰা প্ৰতি বছৰে বিশ্ব শ্ৰৱণ দিৱসৰ এটা থিম থাকে আৰু এই বছৰৰ থিম হ'ল সকলোৰে বাবে শ্ৰৱণ শক্তি মই মানসী শৰ্মা কনসালটেন্ট অডিঅলজিষ্ট এট দ্য কক্লিয়াৰ ইমপ্লান্ট চেণ্টাৰ W Pratiksha Guwahati The sense of hearing is like oxygen. We tend to take it for granted unless somebody is not getting enough of it. আপোনালোকে কেতিয়াবা ভাবিছেনে বাৰু যে আমাৰ মগজু বিকাশত শ্ৰৱণ শক্তিৰ কি ধৰণে ভূমিকা আছে এতিয়া কান্দি থকা শিশু যেতিয়া এগৰাকী মাতৃয়ে নিচুকাবলৈ নিজৰ কান্ধত লৈ পেলাই কথা পাতিবলৈ আৰম্ভ কৰে তেতিয়া এই শিশু কান্দোন বন্ধ হৈ যায় এই শিশুৰ যে কান্দোন বন্ধ হৈ যায় তাৰ কাৰণটোৱে হ'ল যে শিশুৱে মাতৃ গৰ্ভত থাকোতে মাতৃৰ প্ৰত্যেকটো শব্দ শুনিবলৈ পায় আৰু মাতৃৰ হৃদয়ৰ স্পন্দন শুনিবলৈ পায় বিভিন্ন গৱেষণায়ো প্ৰকাশ কৰিছে যে যেতিয়া এটি শিশু মাকৰ গৰ্ভত থাকে কিছুমান সাউন্ডছ শুনাৰ লগে লগে তেওঁলোকে মুভমেন্টছ কৰিবলৈ আৰম্ভ কৰে আৰু এই অভিজ্ঞতাটো মই এগৰাকী মাতৃ হৈ যি ধৰণে অনুভৱ কৰিছো আপোনালোকেও নিশ্চয় প্ৰতিগৰাকী মাতৃয়ে এই অভিজ্ঞতাটো কৰিছে This movements to the sound stimulus happens through auditory stimulus and auditory exposure to sounds. In fact, this auditory experience and auditory exposure starts as early as 16th month of gestation. When the baby starts detecting small sounds, by 24th week of gestation, there's a head-turning response to these sounds. Now just think about it. By 9th week of gestation, the ears start to develop, which means that babies are born with 20 weeks of auditory experience and exposure. Not interactive experience, but baby's brain is stimulated with auditory information. There's a whole lot of mother's voice being transmitted through the body to the brain of the baby. That's how crucial auditory exposure and auditory experience is. আৰু সেই কাৰণে আমাৰ আইতা সকলেও গৰ্ভাৱস্থাত থকা মাতৃসকলক ভাল কথা ক'বলৈ আৰু ভাল কথা শুনিবলৈ উপদেশ দিয়ে আপোনালোকে সকলোৱে চাগে অভিমন্যুৰ কাহিনীটো শুনিছে য'ত অভিমন্যুৱে নিজৰ মাতৃৰ গৰ্ভত থকাৰ সময়ত চক্ৰবিহুৰ ভিতৰত কেনেকৈ সোমাব লাগে শুনাৰ পিছতে শুই যোৱাৰ কাৰণে চক্ৰবিহুৰ পৰা কেনেকৈ ওলাব লাগে সেইটো নজনাৰ বাবে তেওঁ চক্ৰবিহুৰ ভিতৰতে আবদ্ধ হৈ থাকিবলগীয়া হয় All these mythological stories and researchers combined together emphasize on the need of stimulating a baby's brain with auditory experience and auditory sounds very early in life so that the important neuronal connections for auditory pathway are formed and babies start developing adequate audition to develop good speech and language development and communication. But there are also babies who are born without a sense of hearing or may develop hearing loss after birth due to prematurity, low birth weight, high bilirubin levels, or cytomegalovirus infections. In fact, researchers study that 4 in every 1,000 babies born have severe to profound hearing loss, and which means that 100,000 babies are born with hearing loss every year. That's a big, big number. And we as professionals should be detecting this hearing loss early in life so that we can use the crucial time to develop the important neuronal connections to give very good audition to these children so that they can develop age-appropriate speech and language development and communication skills. Now, what is hearing? It's brain access to auditory information. Hearing is a brain function. We human beings are born with amazing sensory structures like the ears, the eyes, the nose, the mouth, and the skin. And the duty of the sensory structures is to pick up important environmental information and convert it into neuroelectric and chemoelectric information, impulses, which are read by the brain. For example, while smelling, the olfactory molecules enter through the nose and it reaches the brain. But the knowing of the smelling happens in the brain. For example, oh, that's a choco chip cookie, or oh, that's a diaper which needs changing. The knowing of the meaning of the olfactory data happens in the brain. Similarly, our ears are the doorway to the brain. The knowing of the meaning of the auditory information happens in the brain. And that's why hearing is a brain phenomena. Babies are born with fully functional ears, ready to take in sounds, but the development of the neuronal connections of the auditory pathway and the maturation of the auditory pathway happens through repeated exposure and experience to sounds. With the repeated exposure and experience to sounds, the important neuronal connections for audition are formed, which helps the baby to develop speech and language development and communication skills. Jonmabosthat, এটি শিশুৰ ব্ৰেইনত around 100 billion neurons থাকে আৰু এই neuronal connections দ্বাৰা এটি শিশুৰ শ্ৰৱণ শক্তি বিকাশ পায় আৰু তেওঁলোকে কথা বুজিবলৈ আৰু কথা ক'বলৈ সক্ষম হয় এটি তিনিমহীয়া শিশুৱে জোৰে জোৰে হোৱা শব্দবোৰ বুজিবলৈ আৰম্ভ কৰে আৰু তেওঁলোকে নিজৰ মনৰ ভাৱ কান্দি বা প্লেচাৰ সাউন্ডছ কৰি যাক আমি কুইং বুলিও কওঁ তাৰ দ্বাৰা প্ৰকাশ কৰে এটি 4 বা 6 মহীয়া শিশুৱে শব্দ এটা কোন দিশৰ পৰা হৈছে তাৰ হেতু বুজিবলৈ আৰম্ভ কৰে আৰু নিজৰ মনোভাৱ প্ৰকাশ কৰিবলৈ তেওঁলোকে বিভিন্ন ধৰণৰ সাউন্ডছ ভোকালাইজ কৰে এটি 7 বা 9 মহীয়া শিশুৱে নিজৰ নামটো বুজিবলৈ আৰম্ভ কৰে তেওঁলোকে যদি খেলি আছে তেওঁলোকৰ নামটো লোৱাৰ লগে লগে তেওঁলোকে ঘূৰি চাবলৈ আৰম্ভ কৰে আৰু এই সময়তে তেওঁলোকে বাবলিং কৰা আৰম্ভ কৰে যেনে মাম্মা মাম্মা বাবা বাবা এনেকুৱা ধৰণৰ শব্দ উচ্চাৰণ কৰা আৰম্ভ কৰে যাৰ কোনো অৰ্থ নাথাকে এটি এবছৰীয়া শিশুৱে প্ৰথম অৰ্থ থকা শব্দ ক'বলৈ আৰম্ভ কৰে ধৰক মা দেউতা আহা জুৱা নাই টাটা যিকোনো শব্দ যাৰ অৰ্থ আছে আৰু এই সময়তে তেখেতসকলে শব্দবোৰৰ লগত মিনিংছবোৰ এছ'চিয়েট কৰা আৰম্ভ কৰে মা শব্দটো মাকৰ লগতে এছ'চিয়েট কৰিবলৈ আৰম্ভ কৰে এটি 2 বছৰীয়া শিশুৱে সৰু সৰু বাক্য বুজিবলৈ আৰম্ভ কৰে যেনে মাম্মাম খাবা পুপু যাবা এনে ধৰণৰ সৰু সৰু বাক্যবোৰ বুজিবলৈ আৰম্ভ কৰে আৰু এই সময়তে তেখেতসকলে এনেকুৱা সৰু সৰু বাক্যবোৰ ৰিপিট বা ইমিটেট কৰিবলৈ আৰম্ভ কৰে So the period between 0 to 3 years is a very sensitive period, an ideal time window to develop language skills in a linguistically rich environment, beyond which language learning becomes very effortful and difficult. This is also the time for the brain to develop rapidly. At birth, a baby has around 2,500 neuronal connections. And by the time they turn 3, they have around 15,000 neuronal connections. Every second of their life, around 700 to 1,000 new neuronal connections are formed. This complex brain circuitry is important for very important brain functions like memory, cognition, problem-solving skills, communication, motor functions, etc. And this amazing capacity of the brain to organize and reorganize itself is called neuroplasticity. Now, an average adult has around half the number of neuronal connections which a baby has, because the brain has the capacity to strengthen the neuronal connections which it is using on a regular basis and eliminate the neuronal connections which it is not using by a process called synaptic pruning. That is why we should be using the sensitive period called critical age period between 0 to 3 years to develop those important neuronal connections for audition, which would aid a child to develop age-appropriate speech and language development, cognitive skills, and communication skills. Researchers also emphasize on the need of early auditory brain access for maturation of auditory pathways, which is also considered as a precondition for normal development of listening, spoken language, and literacy. Also, auditory exposure in the first year of life is important for rapid brain development, and which is why detecting of hearing loss early in life is a neurological emergency. Also, it has been seen that babies who are exposed to auditory information in the first 6 months of life achieve better later in life who are diagnosed with hearing loss. Parent talk is the most important and valuable resource. No matter the language, the culture, the nuances of vocabulary, the socio-economic status, language is the element which helps the brain to develop to its optimum potential. And similarly, lack of language is the enemy to brain development. Researchers have shown that babies who are born in a linguistically deprived environment have the same amount of linguistic skills as those babies who are born deaf. So it's very, very important for parents to start talking to their children very, very early in life. অভিভাৱকসকলৰ কাৰণে এইটো খুব গুৰুত্বপূৰ্ণ যে তেওঁলোকে নিজৰ শিশুৰ লগত খুব সোনকালে কথা পাতিবলৈ আৰম্ভ কৰে, especially in an era where babies spend more time with their nannies and with the telephones and TV screen rather than with their parents. No wonder the TV screen or the mobile phone will teach them academics, but it will not teach the babies communications. So hence it is very, very important that the parents take the onus upon themselves to teach language to their children with the help of the street teens by tuning in. অভিভাৱকসকলৰ কাৰণে খুব গুৰুত্ব যে তেওঁলোকে নিজৰ বেবীৰ ৰেছপন্সক ৰেছপন্ড কৰে। ধৰক যদি বেবী এটাই কান্দি আছে বা শিশুটোৱে কান্দি আছে, তেওঁলোকে ক'ব পাৰে যে তুমি কিয় কান্দি আছা বাৰু, মোৰ পেটত ভোক আছে নেকি বাৰু, তোমাক খাবলৈ মন গৈছে নেকি? তেনেকে তেওঁলোকে এটা কনভাৰচেশ্যন নিজৰ শিশুৰ লগত আৰম্ভ কৰিব পাৰে। Secondly, by talking more, there should be a running commentary happening and taking place throughout the day with whatever is happening around them and whatever is happening at that moment of time. For example, যদি এটা শিশুৱে ক্ৰল কৰি বা আঁঠু কাঢ়ি এটা জাগালৈ গৈ আছে, তেতিয়া এগৰাকী মাতৃয়ে ক'ব পাৰে যে তুমি আঁঠু কাঢ়ি তুমি ৰাতিটো আনিবলৈ গৈ আছা নেকি বাৰু? মই বুজি পাইছো। বাহিৰত এটা ডগিয়ে ভুকি আছে নেকি? ডগিটো ভোক লাগিছে নেকি? তুমি আৰু মই বিস্কিট দিবলৈ যাম নেকি বাৰু? This way they should be communicating and talking to their children, talking to their babies continuously, and there should be a running commentary that should be happening throughout the day. That is how important talking to a child is, because if you talk continuously to a child, that will help the child to develop vocabulary and appropriate language and speech development. Also, parents should give the opportunity, the chance, the time for their babies, their children to respond. Because then they will understand that communication is a two-way process. They should wait for the child, for their babies to respond. And this response can be through any medium. It may be gestures, it may be through verbal mode of communication, like if it's a baby, then the baby can communicate or respond by crying or cooing or by babbling or even by even by saying single meaningful words. So the parents should really give them the opportunity to communicate, so that the babies, the children, they understand that they'll have to wait for the turn to respond, that they need to respond to questions, they need to respond to statements. And that is how babies, that is how children, they will develop vocabulary, they will develop appropriate language skills, they will know how to communicate. And this is a time when they should be actually exposed to a very good linguistic environment, so that the babies, the stage for optimum brain development is done. We've also seen that when we were young, amar aita hokole amak khub buriai hathu hunaisile. Taru kintu eta scientific reason ase. Reading is very important to develop a very good rapport with your children, to develop attention skills, to develop auditory attention, to develop vocabulary, which will help them to develop literacy and good awareness skills later on in life. Researchers have shown that good oral narrating skills of parents are directly connected to good literacy and reading later on in life with children. On an average, a child should be hearing around 60 lakh words per year, which comes to around 16,438 words per day, which comes to around 1,370 words per hour. And by the time a child turns 3, he should have heard around 30 million words. That's how important reading to a child, talking to your child is. A 4-month-old baby will not understand what the parent is reading to him or her, but the warmth of the voice of the parent will really make him connect with the parent, which is very, very important for them to understand the process of communication. In fact, ajikali amar local publishers ekla dhuniya dhuniya koru kitab ulaise, jot eta story 4 বা 5 পেজতে শেষ হৈ যায়, আৰু তেওঁলোকে ডাঙৰ pictures থাকে সেই কিতাপবোৰত, য'ত parents বোলে really use কৰিব পাৰে, আৰু তেওঁলোকে narrate কৰিব পাৰে এই stories on a regular basis, so that they start making the rapport with the children and They help the children to develop age-appropriate speech and language skills. And finally, Jeffrey Eugenides has truly said that biology gives you a brain, but life turns it into a mind. Thank you.